Tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh.
Always wondering who you're waiting to.
That you took it personally, right? Tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, which means that we're now in the time period where the Jewish people were preparing to receive the Torah, because the first moment of really like staging the giving of the Torah was on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Obviously, they were preparing already from Pesach, because we know that they were counting the Omer, and counting the Omer was a procedure that was designed to allow them the opportunity to move towards receiving the Torah. Bear in mind that they came out of a very bad spiritual place. They were at the 49th level of impurity, and there's only 50 levels that a person could experience, so they were at a pretty low level. And then over the 49 days of the Omer, they were given a program that was supposed to allow them to rehabilitate themselves and prepare to receive the Torah. So obviously they've been preparing all along. But what happens on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, so the Gemara goes through day by day these last few days until they receive the Torah. Rosh Chodesh Sivan is the day that they arrived at Sinai. So that's a very important moment. You can imagine they've been looking forward to this. They're very excited. They're preparing. They've been talking about the receiving of the Torah. That was like right from the beginning, from the burning bush. Hashem already told Moshe the whole purpose of leaving Egypt is that you're going to get to the mountain, and then you're going to serve Hashem, and I'm going to give you the Torah. Now they're there. They've gotten to the destination, and we get told that there were a few stages of preparation that they had to go through in order to receive the Torah. They get told the next day, the 2nd of Sivan, they get told the whole speech by Hashem, obviously via Moshe, how important they are to Hashem, the fact that they're now going to become the chosen nation, what he calls Mamleches Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And he says that you're going to be Am Segula, which we often translate as the chosen nation, but it actually means a little bit more than that. A Segula is like a treasure. So a nation that Hashem treasures in a very unique way. Then after that, the following day, they are given instructions about how they're supposed to, the 3rd and the 4th of Sivan, they're given instructions about how they're supposed to prepare themselves in order to receive the Torah, the various things that they had to do. One of the things is they had to cordon off the mountain, because nobody was allowed onto Mount Sinai, except for Joshua, who was allowed partway up the mountain, and Moshe, who went all the way to the top of the mountain, obviously to receive the Torah. And they were given instruction about how they had to go to the mikveh to prepare themselves to receive the Torah. And once they had been to the mikveh for 3 days of preparation to receive the Torah, husbands and wives had to remain separate from each other in order to ensure that nobody re-entered a state of impurity before they got to receive the Torah. The day before the Torah was given, Moshe has to build an altar, and they have to bring a series of sacrifices. They also make the famous declaration, Na'aseh v'nishma, we're going to do everything that Hashem says, and you can fill in the details later. So there's a tremendous amount of focus and preparation in order to receive the Torah, which obviously makes sense, because this is a mega event in Jewish history. So obviously you've got to get yourself into the right place, in the right headspace, and be in a spiritual space that you could experience this at the highest level. And then, of course, on the 6th of Sivan, Hashem gives us the Torah. So effectively, if you go through the Gemara, we're told every step of preparation that they had to do on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th of Sivan, and then the presentation of the Torah on the 6th of Sivan. But when it comes to the first day, when they arrive at Mount Sinai, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, nothing. There appears to be no preparation to receive the Torah on that day. They've just gotten into town, they've arrived at the campground, and that's it. That's all we're told. We're not told that they have to do anything to prepare, which seems a little bit strange. I mean, obviously, you know how it is, Jewish people trying to set up camp. It could take a few minutes, and there was probably a little bit of jostling, for position. We want to be closer to the mountain and whatever, and they have to be told, you've got to camp here and you've got to camp there, and people have to conform, and they've got to set themselves up, etc. So, fine. You can anticipate that it took up a fair amount of their energy and a fair amount of their time. However, it does seem strange that there's nothing to do on the day that they arrive at Sinai to start preparing to receive the Torah. You'd expect at least something. You'd expect, for example, that Moshe would gather everybody together and say, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, this is the place. You will get further instructions tomorrow, but I just want you to be aware of the fact that this is where it's all going down, and there's going to be this massive revolution over here of the divine revelation and the giving of the Torah. Something, I don't know, something, say something. If it was a little bit more of a Hasidic crowd, have a Farbrengen. If it was a little bit more of a yeshivish crowd, have a shiur, something. And there's not a word, absolutely nothing, zero information about what occurred on that day, other than the fact that they arrived. What else occurred on that day? So the Gemara in Shabbos, which is where you've got all of the information that the sages give us about the story of the giving of the Torah, and that's where it spells out what happened on the 2nd and the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and 6th of Sivan. So in that Gemara, it addresses this question. Why is there nothing happening on Rosh Chodesh? First day that they get to Sinai, full radio silence. Why? What happened? So the Gemara says, what happened is that the Jewish people experienced what is called Chulsha de Urcha. Chulsha, this is it's an Aramaic expression. So Chulsha, you might recognize from the Hebrew word Chalash, which means weak. And Urcha is the Aramaic word for the way, the path. So Chulsha de Urcha means essentially that they were wiped out from the journey. That's basically what it sounds like. They were wiped out, they were exhausted. So because they were exhausted, Moshe says, you know what, today we're not doing anything, we're having a rest day, everybody can just take it easy. Tomorrow we'll start to prepare to receive the Torah. That's what the Gemara implies. Chulsha de Urcha. Everybody's, as they say in the classics, famatet. Everybody's wiped out. Okay, so I'd like to ask you a question. Have you ever traveled overseas? Do you know what Chulsha de Urcha is? That's when you arrive over there, you say, I didn't sleep a wink on the plane, and there was this baby in 2 rows behind me that didn't stop crying the whole time, and the seat was so uncomfortable, and now I'm completely exhausted, and there's a time difference, and I'm experiencing jet lag. I'm completely exhausted. Right? We could all relate. And so it's perfectly normal that a person after a long journey gets to their destination and says, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to see anybody, I just want to collapse into bed. Fair enough, right? Let's change the scenario slightly. Let's say that you had to travel 6 time zones away, 14-hour flights, so you're going to the east coast of America, let's just say. But the reason that you're going is because your child or your grandchild is getting married. So now you arrive and you've got the same jet lag, and you had this person behind you who didn't fit in their seat, so they were constantly pushing against your seat. And the food on the plane was terrible, or they didn't deliver the kosher meal and you had to eat your pretzels. And you're jet lagged and you're uncomfortable and all of that. But there's a wedding. Are you also going to say, leave me alone, I just want to go lie down in bed? No, you'll say as they say in the classics, Chulsha de Urcha ahin, Chulsha de Urcha aher. Doesn't matter what kind of issues are going on. I'm so excited and invigorated by the fact that there's a big family simcha that I'll find energy and resources that I didn't even know that I had. And so you'll hit the ground running and you'll get involved in the simcha. Okay, maybe you'll take a little nap. But at the end of the day, you'll be fired up and you'll be enthusiastic and you'll be excited. And that will override whatever physical restrictions you might have. And tomorrow you'll sleep. Or maybe after Sheva Brachos, or whatever the case. When you get back on the flight, I don't know. But that's human nature. Human nature is that journeys exhaust us. But if the reason for the journey is something which we really care about and we've really looked forward to, then we'll find the strength. We'll find us a little bit of adrenaline. Something's going to drive us, and then we'll be in a whole different space. We'll be driven. So let's plug that into the story of the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people have spent the last 7 weeks on a journey with a singular destination in mind, to get to Sinai to receive the Torah. We know that the Jewish people were so excited and enthusiastic about this that they began this process of counting the days. So yes, of course, they were given a program to be able to rehabilitate and elevate themselves spiritually, but they're the ones who came up with the idea of let's count down, or actually count up, to this experience of receiving the Torah because they were so enthusiastic. Now they get there. This is no longer theory. This is no longer a goal. We're at Sinai. Don't you think Moshe should have capitalized on their excitement and said, you know what, guys? Now we're here. Let's do something to prepare. I know you're all really worked up about this. You're really excited about this. Let's do something. Let's capture the energy. Well, I don't have to spend the whole day on this. You could still rest. But let's do something. How's he willing to say, you know what, guys? This is a big deal. And you've been schlepping and everybody's tired. Let's leave it for tomorrow. Does that sound like a rabbi? Does that sound like a Jewish leader? So, okay, fine. I'm sorry, everybody, last night we stayed up the whole night learning. This morning, shul's off. You don't have to come. Can you imagine? Can you imagine like a rabbi taking that attitude? So how is it that they've worked towards this goal of being at Sinai and being prepared to receive the Torah, and because they're enthusiastic about the Torah, when they eventually get there, the day they arrive, Moshe says, rest day. Doesn't seem to make sense. Or let's flip it from the other side. If it's accurate that the Jewish people were so enthusiastic that they were counting the days till they would receive the Torah. So again, what's human nature? Do you get bored or do you get energized as you get closer to the day that you've been counting the days till? Obviously you get excited, right? You get more and more excited. And you might go through a little bit of a lull halfway through. But as you get very close to the big day, so you get more excited. Which means if Moshe from his side decided, look, I think everybody's been through a lot, we're going to call it a quiet day today, you would have expected at least some of the Jews to say, no, we need something. We're so excited, we can't sleep. We're on edge. This is it. We're in the place. This is Sinai. It's all happening. The promises are coming true. Moshe, give us something. You'd expect, right? You'd expect at least a little bit of, nudging. So if, for whatever reason, and it still doesn't really make sense to us, Moshe did not want to push them, it also does not make sense from their side that they didn't want to push Moshe. Like it feels almost as if you've got this tremendous surge of enthusiasm that just fizzles out when they're actually at the point of, it's all going to happen now.
It also
seems
sounds
very
like
strange.
The destination took precedence over the actual event that was going to happen.
Okay, well, the event, okay, fair enough, exactly. So you've got to the destination, so now you no longer are so enthusiastic about the event that's supposed to happen at the destination. It's a really good point. So let's talk about that point for a moment. Where do we make exactly that comment? And everybody knows this, but you're probably just not going to make the association. But everybody knows this. Where do we make that comment that the destination is such a big deal that it even, in a sense, overshadows the event that's supposed to happen at the destination? In other words, getting to Sinai is such a big deal that it even gives us the sense of satisfaction that maybe you could say, okay, we're here. And the fact that the Torah is still to be given maybe recedes a little bit from view. Where do you see that? Anybody? No?
Worship?
No? Dayenu. At the Pesach Seder we say, Ilu kervonu lifnei har Sinai. Had Hashem brought us to Mount Sinai, v'lo inosan lo nes haTorah, and not given us the Torah, dayenu. That would have been good enough. Implying that just being at the destination, being in that environment at Sinai is a very advanced spiritual experience, so much so that actually that in itself should have been reason enough to be satisfied, to be excited, to be grateful. The only problem with that is that only accelerates our question. If it's such a big deal to be at Sinai, so much so that we say in Dayenu that if Hashem had only brought us to Sinai, even without giving us the Torah, that would have been a big achievement. You would expect the guys to be dancing on the rooftops. Not just power down and say, okay, we got to Sinai. To the contrary, if Sinai as a destination is such a big deal, then Sinai as a destination should generate a whole lot of activity. And it doesn't. Why? Before we try and address this, let's just analyze this idea of chulsha de'urcha, of the exhaustion that they've felt because of the journey that they've been on. Now, it's unlikely that anybody will remember offhand where they've just come from, because they didn't come right now from Egypt. Right? There are various stops along the way. So, does anybody recall what the stop was just before this? Or for that matter, what the story was that the Torah told us, the very last story that the Torah tells us just before they get to Sinai, is the story of Rephidim. Rephidim is where they were attacked by Amalek. So at the end of the parasha B'Shalach, the last thing that we read is about the attack of Amalek, which happened in this place, Rephidim. And Yisro, which is the very next parasha, is where they get to Sinai. Okay, there's a little interlude where the man, Yisroi, Moshe's father-in-law, appears on the scene. That doesn't describe their movement. Their movement is from Rephidim to Sinai. So pull out an ancient biblical map and take a look. Because you want to know, they were exhausted from the journey, so surely you want to know, well, how long was this journey? So pull out an ancient map and have a look at the distance between Rephidim and Sinai. And it's not far. It's really not far. It's not a terrible journey. It's not a transatlantic flight. It's whatever, a few hours journey, whatever it is. You're talking about people now who've been on the road for 7 weeks. As far as travels go, this is probably one of the smallest, shortest segments of their travel. So now they're so washed out. Now they're so exhausted. Take it a step further. If you work it out, we know that the Torah was given on a Shabbos. Okay? Torah was given on a Shabbos. So that means that Shabbos is the 6th of Sivan, which means Friday is the 5th, Thursday is the 4th, Wednesday is the 3rd, Tuesday is? Second. So Rosh Chodesh is? Monday. That means they've just had Shabbos. It's not like they've been on the road for a week. Even if they traveled at a slow pace. They couldn't have been traveling for that long. I mean, whatever the distance is from Rephidim to Sinai, which is not a huge distance, okay, so they've been on the road for a day. And now they're at their destination. How are you so wiped out from one day of travel? Every other part of their journey, there were, not every other part, because there were some places they camped for years, but there were times where they traveled for the whole week from Shabbos to Shabbos.
This was afterwards.
After what?
After the giving of the Torah.
I'm saying, but the point is that I'm sure there were other places where they had to travel for a week without a break, and they must have been exhausted then too. There's no other occasion in the 40 years of the desert where we're told that they were so exhausted from the journey. No other occasion. This is the only occasion where the physical distance is not so big and the amount of days of travel is quite limited. So what about this journey could have been so exhausting? Plus, you have to remember how they traveled. They traveled literally first class. Because you think of it, right? So you imagine, okay, the desert must be hot, and there's sand blowing in your eyes, and there's all these dunes that you have to try get over. Can you imagine with kids and animals and whatever trying to get over the sand dunes in the middle of the desert, or schlepping in the heat or whatever? You know, you kind of imagine that it's not an easy thing. But we know, and the Torah tells us this clearly, that when the Jews traveled, there was a cloud that led the way. And the way that the Torah describes it is that the cloud was lan choisam haderech, which literally means to lead them down the path. But it also implies that it's to make the journey easier. And we're told that the cloud did a number of different things. Firstly, it flattened the terrain on their path. So there were no dunes that they had to deal with. And there were no boulders lying in their way because it cleared a path for them. Also, we know that the clouds fumigated the area. So if there were any pests or snakes or scorpions, whatever it was, in the path that they were walking, there was nothing to be afraid of. So you didn't have to watch your step and be cautious that somebody's going to get hurt. Plus, we're told that inside the clouds, besides the cloud that led them, there were also the clouds that surrounded them. And that protected them from the heat and kept a very even climate inside the clouds, which means they were not schwitzing away on the journey. So generally speaking, not only in this particular instance, but generally speaking, as the Jewish people were traveling through the desert, it wasn't a particularly exhausting experience. It was actually a fairly easy experience. In fact, according to some commentaries, they were actually traveling in a hovercraft. That the clouds were not only above and on the sides, but actually beneath them as well, and literally transporting them through the desert. So whichever way you look at it, it's not as if they had this arduous journey from place to place that would have exhausted them, which then just like reiterates the question: why are they so exhausted? From what? How? Where? And so we're going to have to conclude that there are two kinds of journeys that a person or a group of people might go on. The obvious is a physical journey that goes from point A to point B. And then it's very obvious that if it's a difficult journey, you're going to be more tired, and if it's an easy journey, you're going to be less tired. Equally, people go on spiritual journeys as well. And we've already identified that to get from Egypt to Sinai did require a spiritual journey. That's why there's the whole process of the Omer, and there's 49 days of this graded spiritual development, where every single day you're focused on some area of personal development so that you can get closer and closer to being in a position to receive the Torah. So if their physical journey did not exhaust them, then let's explore if perhaps they had been on a spiritual journey that was an exhausting journey. And what we're going to discover is that while every single day from Egypt until this point had been a gradual spiritual movement to get them to the point where they were ready to receive the Torah, there is something that happens from Rephidim to Sinai that is actually a radical movement of their spiritual journey. And it's such a radical movement, there's such a shift that's supposed to happen on that last leg from Rephidim to Sinai that it's an exhausting experience. And that's why they don't have to. It's not that they didn't do anything on Rosh Chodesh because they were distracted or tired or whatever. They don't have to do anything on Rosh Chodesh because Rosh Chodesh itself is going to be such a profound shift in terms of their prep to receive the Torah that that exponential shift is enough for the day. You don't have to add any formalities for the day. Question is, what is that massive shift? You have to come back on Friday for that.